coming to my talk is an approach to shaky eyes or nystagmus. So what exactly is nystagmus? So it is a rhythmic biphasic oscillation of the eyes and it's a conjugate movement. So why does nystagmus occur? Nystagmus occurs whenever there are three main control mechanisms which help in maintaining the steady gaze fixations. So it can be your the fixation mechanisms, the vestibulo-ocular reflex, and the neural integrator. So the fixation mechanism has both the afferent and the efferent components. The afferent is the sensory guidance to vision, and the efferent being the motor guidance. The vestibular system, which will move the eyes in response to the self motion. So that again has both central and peripheral organs, and the neural integrator, which maintains the vision when you are looking at a moving target, which includes the saccades and the pursuits. The direction of nystagmus is defined by the direction of the foveating saccade. And mostly it is of pendular or the jerk waveforms. The frequency of nystagmus is around 17 per 10,000, not that common, but we do see quite a number of cases. And if we see the congenital forms alone, it will fall around 14 per 10,000, and the acquired causes will be around 3 per 10,000. So we need to differentiate between nystagmus versus another movement called as saccadic intrusions or oscillations, which are not true nystagmus. So how do you differentiate between these two? The difference is in the initial movement that disrupts fixation. In nystagmus, it is always a slow drift followed by a fast refixation movement. The direction of the refixation determines the direction of nystagmus. Whereas in saccadic intrusions and oscillations, it is the fast movement that moves the eyes off the target. So you have various types of saccadic intrusions that can be the square wave jerks, the macrosaccadic oscillations, and other forms. So as you can see here, these are the square wave jerks. You have the sudden jerky movement or saccades, which are superimposed when an object is fixating on a target. So coming to the classification, the CMAS or the eye movement disorder, eye movement and strabismus, they have classified the nystagmus based on the types, the direction, and the amplitude. So based on the age of onset, you can classify them as congenital and acquired, and based on the nature of movement, it can be pendular or the jerk forms. The plane of movement can either be horizontal, vertical, or torsional, and based on the effect of fixation, it can be latent, latent, or manifest. So coming to the types of nystagmus in children, the most common form is the infantile nystagmus syndrome, INS, which was earlier called as the congenital nystagmus. Secondly, we have the fusion mole development nystagmus syndrome, FMNS, or the latent manifest latent nystagmus group. Third will be the spasmus nutans, and then the last is nystagmus secondary to either endocerebellar or vestibular or neurological causes. So coming to what is exactly the infantile nystagmus syndrome, it is an early onset nystagmus with an onset less than 6 months of age. So it is not usually seen at birth. It is an ocular pathology. So it can be, what are the reasons for this? It can either be because of various degrees of visual deprivation or the sensory reason. It can be a primarily neurological abnormality, which may or may not be associated with an ocular pathology. Or it can be an isolated inherited idiopathic oculomotor disorders. To be simple, either motor, sensory, or neurological causes. Both congenital and the latent manifest latent group are more frequent in children with periventricular leukomalacia, is a thing that you can remember. So coming to the idiopathic nystagmus syndrome, the earliest waveform is pendular. As you can see, this kid, he had a mild form of albinism, but you do see the jerk forms in the end cases, while in the center you see the pendular form. So the jerk form is usually not developed initially. It comes only by 2 years of age. The nystagmus forms can be inherited. They can have autosomal dominant, recessive, or sporadic ways of inheritance. But the thing to remember is this: these nystagmus is always horizontal. Even in vertical gaze, it continues to be horizontal. INS has a null point, and the null point is usually within 10 degrees of fixation. It dampens with convergence. That is why we get the fusion nystagmus blockade. It exacerbates with fixation. So when we ask them to read monocular vision, the visual acuity drops, and there is no oscillopsia because it is at birth. That is a compensatory mechanism, and the patient do not complain of oscillopsia. If there is a complaint of oscillopsia, it is not a inherited or it's not a congenital form. So idiopathic infantile nystagmus associated with a null zone. This is the way we measure the nystagmus, the head posture. The patient, because of the head posture, the patient tries to maintain the null position with the fixation on the object of regard. So it can be measured by a simple goniometer, as is being done here, where you just align the primary, and then you see the tip of the nose and you align the other and just measure the angle. And there are various other ways of measuring head posture also, including the CROM type of instruments. And you can measure both in the face turn, the head tilt, and also the chin elevation or depression. So why the patients adopt the AHP is because they want to shift the null zone from the eccentric position to the primary position. And that is also, they get better vision with the null zone. So decreased vision and nystagmus, or a sensory deficit nystagmus, is due to disorders of afferent visual pathway. This is a severe case of sensory nystagmus due to oculocutaneous albinism. You can see in all cases of nystagmus, you need to look for iris transillumination defects, because sometimes the albinism will be very subtle and you'll be able to pick up only the transillumination defects. This is a patient who had aniridia with just a small iris stump, and there again you get the pendular waveforms. And this is a child, the third one is a child with a congenital cataract. In congenital cataract also you do get nystagmus when the treatment is delayed. So it is always better to operate and on the cataract and give corrective refractive correction in terms of glasses or IOL before the onset of nystagmus. So again, this is a eye with a microphthalmos with a coloboma, where left eye there is a total loss of vision and right eye is microphthalmic with nystagmus. And this child has born with Leber's congenital amaurosis, where you can see this is not exactly nystagmus, it's a roving and searching kind of movement, which you can see in very profound vision loss. That's called a roving movement. So coming to FMNS, so here in this video, you can see the child who has a large esotropia. So this is actually a esotropia that the child is adopting to block the nystagmus, because the nystagmus reduces with convergence. So why does this happen? It's because of asymmetric sensory or motor deficit. Usually this is FMNS is associated with strabismus, especially esotropia. And the thing is, it is not visible when both the eyes are open, but you can see it only when one eye is being occluded, and the direction of the nystagmus is towards the fixating eye. And nystagmus blockade is a special form, which I have already told. That is to dampen the nystagmus in order to convert it into a low amplitude FMN. So this is a Spasmus-Newton syndrome, where the onset is more than 6 months of age and prior to 2 to 3 years of age. So it is a triad of nystagmus with head nodding and anomalous head posture, that is called torticollis. And the good thing is it resolves by 5 years. But you always have to do a neuroimaging, because rarely it can be because of a chiasmal glioma. So if the chiasmal glioma is not there and the MRI is clean, you can reassure the parents. Most often times it resolves by 5 years. An important thing to remember is the periodic alternating nystagmus. When you're seeing a patient of nystagmus, it's always better to observe the patient for a minimum period of 5 minutes so that you don't miss this condition. It's an unusual congenital motor jerk nystagmus with a 60 to 90 second one-sided jerk, and then there is no nystagmus, and then there is a nystagmus in the opposite direction. Usually there are 2 null positions. So the thing is, if you operate for one AHP, then the patient can adopt the other null after surgery. So it is better to treat it medically with medications like baclofen, and the surgery is, the surgical procedure is different. It is recession of all 4 horizontal recti, not a modified Anderson's procedure. So functional implications are, because of sensory associations, and even in motor nystagmus, you can have little poor vision, and the reading speed is very much decreased. There has been studies where the patients with nystagmus are shown to have around a 30% reduction in the reading speed as compared to the normal children of their age group. And that leads to, and even it's a very visible thing, you cannot hide that they have a problem. So they have poor self-esteem and increased dependency. So you have to take a thorough history with the age of onset, the birth and developmental history, family history of nystagmus, any photophobia, any other neurological abnormalities, history of oscillopsia, or any medication intake, because recent onset of certain medications can also induce nystagmus. And assessment of the child's vision behavior. You have to document the vision in all cases whenever possible. And when you are doing a monocular vision, you don't put the cover, you just do a fogging so that you don't degrade the vision in the other eye. Measure the anomalous head posture, characterize the nystagmus with the type, amplitude, direction, null point. Then if there is strabismus associated, we need to measure the strabismus. Other tests like color vision, anterior segment, transillumination defects, paradoxical pupils are seen in some retinal anomalies, red reflex, fundus evaluation, and in acquired nystagmus, neurological is very important. And then ERG and VEP for diagnostic purposes and OCT can also be contemplated to assess the macula. So is it very essential to record the nystagmus? If you have the if there is a possibility, then it is good to record, because you can document and detailed review the monocular versus binocular nystagmus, direction of movement, the frequency, slow phase, and null point can be all very well seen. So you need to know when you are recording that what is the meaning of foveation period. So foveation period is the brief amounts of time when the eyes are moving with a sufficiently slow velocity whenever the visual axis is near the target. So when you are recording a nystagmus, there are two ways of measuring the visual acuity. So that is something called as a NAFEX score. The NAFEX score will directly correspond to the vision potential of that patient. So it is an expanded nystagmus acuity function, and this has been developed by D'Aosso and colleagues. And the other thing which closely corresponds to the NAFEX score is the NOF, which can be done in children, because for NAFEX you need to have a head very still with the chin rest. It may not be possible in small children. So NOF actually corrects for the movement of the child, and the child need not maintain a steady head posture while recording to measure the NOF values. So there are 12 different waveforms from pure jerk to pure pendular with varying forms in between. As you can see here, this is the position recording, and this is the velocity. And this part where you can see a very less movement is actually the part of foveation, where the velocity is also the minimum. So how do you record this? Is by the Limbus reflection goggle systems, where you look at a red target or some target which a child can see. And also it can be done by remote video tracker with a camera whenever the goggles will not be worn, especially small children. So the fixation stimuli is presented with targets in a dim room. And for able children, you can use the head support and the chin rest. So you see here, this is a nystagmus recording where this is a right gaze, where you can see that the waveforms are quite, you can see the nystagmus movements quite marked. Primary position is less, where in the left gaze, the movements very less, so which is corresponding to the null zone. So you can have a documentation of this before you do the surgery. And here we can see two null zones, which is actually the convergence null. So if you see convergence null, those patients can benefit by either you can give base out prisms on both eyes, or you can contemplate on an artificial divergence surgery. So coming to neuroimaging, any sudden onset nystagmus, infant who presents with any atypical form like asymmetric monocular, associations with optic nerve hypoplasias or optic atrophies, gliomas, craniopharyngiomas can be presenting with nystagmus or even associated hydrocephalus. Sometimes even life-threatening disorders like retinoblastomia, septo-optic dysplasias and all can present with nystagmus. So always better to do an neuroimaging whenever you have a suspicion. The aim of management is to stabilize the eyes, to improve the vision, to decrease the occulopsia, or to shift the null zone towards the primary position. So these are the aims of surgery. So the non-surgical management, like if there is
Dr. Sandra, we are not able to listen to you correctly. Can other doctors confirm?
If you can the nystagmus in most
Yes, the voice is not clear.
Soft contact lenses will clear us and improve the nystagmus. To stabilize the eyes, to improve the visual acuity, decrease occulopsia, or to shift the null zone towards the position. And management, you can give either basal prisms, contact lenses, drugs, or Botox. Surgical management procedure for the head tilt, you can operate obliques or transposition of recti, and chin elevation or depression, again you can do recession of vertical recti. So coming to the surgical management, decreasing nystagmus intensity can be done by artificial divergence, maximal recession of all horizontal recti.
Ma'am, your PPT is not visible.
Yeah, then suddenly my internet connections is a bit bad. I'll just finish it up. It's just another 2-3 slides.
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah. So I'll just like to share the clinical evaluation of Anderson's procedure that we did in a study of around 17 patients, where 37 patients between Jan 2014 to 2017, where the mean AHP with the augmented Anderson improved from 22.5 degrees preoperatively to 7.58 degrees at 1 month post-operative visit. So, and also this was associated with an improvement in the visual acuity also. And but when you are faced with a situation like a complex head posture, then you may have like problems having combination of face turn, chin elevation or depression, and head tilt, or a combination of these. So this is a patient who came to us with like a 10-year-old with anomalous head posture, and she had a right face turn, a right head tilt, and a chin elevation of 10 degrees. And but there was no associated strabismus. Her visual acuity was very good in the levo depression. So rest of her ocular exam is normal. So to correct the horizontal, the right face turn, we operated on the right medial rectus and the left lateral rectus recessions, which is an augmented Anderson procedure, along with the rotatory Kestenbaum procedure, where you shift the vertical recti, like the right inferior rectus alone we had transposed with the left temporally with the left eye nasal transposition of the inferior rectus with the recession. So this was a pre-op and the post-operative head postures following the rotatory Kestenbaum. So what exactly is rotatory Kestenbaum? So we have to remember that when there is a head tilt, the same side is incyclotorted and the opposite side is excyclotorted. So that is similar to having a superior oblique overaction and IO underaction on the same side, and SR overaction and IR underaction on the same side, and vice versa on the opposite side. So we have to extort the eye on the same side and intort the eye on the opposite side. So this can be done by surgery on the obliques or recti. So we have to weaken the superior oblique and strengthen the inferior oblique ipsilateral. And if you want to operate on recti, we have to nasally transpose superior rectus and temporally transpose inferior rectus, and vice versa on the opposite side. So because of this management, which I have already told. So in this patient, we did only the inferior recti because we didn't want to operate on 3 recti muscles. And also associated chin elevation was there, so we did it along with the recession. So